Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I want just to start off by sort of synchronizing and doing a call and response. So repeat after me. Say, everything
Everything
is all right.
is all right.
Say, everything
Everything
is all right.
is all right.
So I know mental illness is kind of a heavy issue, but I'm going to try to keep it as light and interactive as I can for my section of it. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Start off. The first question. Churchill, Beethoven, Michelangelo, Kanye West. What do they have in common? Suggestions? Shout it out.
Creative?
They're creative. Yeah, exactly. But spoiler, they also describe many symptoms of bipolar disorder. And not to brag, but I was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder in high school and in early college. And some of the symptoms are mania, which is irritability, flightiness, sleeplessness, and also I suffered from enervating bouts with depression, where I felt like I didn't have the motivation to even get out of bed. But I'd say the biggest impact has been dealing with it socially, having a hard time expressing to people that I am suffering from bipolar disorder, or from communicating how my actions change and vary because of that. So recently, however, whenever I go to the doctor, I'm no longer diagnosed with bipolar disorder. They don't prescribe me any medication. And it's only been a few years, so it doesn't seem likely that I've changed so fundamentally that I'm no longer have bipolar disorder, especially when I feel many of the same symptoms every day. I've just developed a series of habits that help ground me and allow me to sort of cope with the issues. So I guess my biggest takeaway from that experience is that mental health is a universal issue, and that diagnosis only comes into play when you feel that your mental illness is really restricting you from being able to engage in work, rest, and enjoyment, and relationships. So it comes from a wide array of different symptoms, and there's a wide array of different responses to those symptoms, but everybody is on some level dealing with the issues of mental illness in modern society. So if it's such a universal issue, why is there so much stigma surrounding mental illness? You guys have any suggestions, like anything in your personal life?
People are afraid of it.
People are afraid of it. Yeah, that's definitely a strong one. I hear that a lot of people are afraid of it. They don't really understand it that well. But what my theory is that people want to imagine themselves as sort of invulnerable. Like mental illness, if they don't think about it, if they don't acknowledge it within another person, it could never possibly happen to them. And because seeing that in another person is a reflection of how they might see that in themselves, it might be an indication that they're not really as in control of their thoughts and emotions as they would like to be. So the impact of stigma is really visible and apparent, but I'm going to illustrate this with a story. A couple semesters ago, I met this Indian student who came from over from India, and he had been admitted to the local mental hospital after a bout of suicidal depression. And I started visiting him, started talking to him, started bringing him his favorite food, sushi, and we would discuss about his life and my life. And eventually I got a call from his mom in India, and she asked me how he was doing, and I explained that her son seemed to me to be really clear-headed, to be really intelligent and focused, and it seemed like his recent struggle had helped him sort of clarify what he wanted to do with his life. And also, it seemed that the mental health treatment that he was receiving actually seemed to be helpful, based by his own admission. Hearing this, she began to cry, because it was such a huge surprise to her, given that what everybody else had told her was about how scary and Spartan the mental health facility was, about how her son had gained a lot of weight and wasn't looking great, and also about how he was peeling at the skin from the electroshock therapy. And so all these examples of stigma had made her feel like when she met her son, she might not even recognize him. And she might not really connect with him in the same way she had before. And me telling her about it gave her a lot of relief. So stigma has had, a lot of different research done on it and on the impact that it has between stigma and mental health outcomes. Just one example is there's a schizophrenia study where patients with schizophrenia who were in families that had lower levels of stigma in fact had 1.5 times better outcomes when it comes to recovery from schizophrenia and schizophrenic symptoms. So the takeaway is that maybe some of you have come to this conference hoping to learn about, how are we supposed to identify early signs of mental illness and prevent them, and how do we follow up to make sure that our family is receiving the treatment they need. And the truth is that diagnosis isn't the goal here. You shouldn't be trying to diagnose your loved ones, because often the diagnosis carries more stigma than solution. Instead, diagnosis often comes from within, meaning that people need to be able to find space to identify the ways in which they're struggling with mental health. And in today's society, that can be really tricky because there is so much stigma surrounding the issue. So in order to allow people to express their own needs for whatever mental health treatment, we have to foster an environment of understanding and low judgment that allows people to feel that they can come forward and explain that they're having a problem. Okay, so that was just a sort of quick overview on what is mental illness, where is it at in society right now. Before I get off stage, I'm going to talk about two specific issues that are really sort of pertinent to everyone within the scope of mental illness, and those are depression and anxiety. So to sort of get off topic here, do you guys know what entropy is? Can anyone give me a quick definition of entropy?
Degree of randomness and closed set.
Exactly. It's the amount of chaos or disorder within a closed system. Now, there's this British researcher named Robert Carhart Harris who explains depression and anxiety as what he calls low entropy mental illnesses, meaning that they reflect too much order in the brain and not enough freedom for it to escape from its definition of ego. So his idea is that we sort of fall into these rigid grooves of ego where we become really fixated on our idea of who we are as individuals as opposed to members of a community. So within this context, the solution seems fairly simple. We have to increase the entropy or degree of chaos or disorder in the brain relative to where we're at right now. And many studies have shown that some of the things that have the biggest impact on increasing depression and deepening depression are ruminating on the issues that are currently affecting you. So if you're feeling sad and you think constantly about what's causing that sadness or what's causing that anxiety, then it's only going to worsen those symptoms, whereas taking an action that is outside of your normal scope is actually going to help you deal with them. So you need to be able to challenge your boundaries at your own pace to increase the amount of chaos in your brain so that it sort of balances out in the system of chaos and control that is human consciousness. Now, as a final note, what kind of action should we take? There's two different sort of subcategories of action that people talk about in this research, and those are extrinsic and intrinsic actions. An extrinsic action is something that you do in order to gain something else. So like working out in order to get buff. We all know someone like that. And an intrinsic action is something that you do in order for its own sake, like working out for the joy of overcoming a hard challenge. So it seems clear that people who take lots of extrinsic actions have more tendency to suffer from anxiety and depression versus people who take actions for intrinsic motivations. Now I want to end with the results of an experiment where a doctor said, instead of giving you antidepressants, I'm going to put all of you people who are suffering from depression in a group where you go out together and plant a garden. And one of the participants said, as the garden bloomed, we also began to bloom. And so go forth and plant gardens in your mind. Thanks very much.